Good morning. Welcome, everyone. My name is Susan Fancy, and I am the Managing Director of the Global CO2 Initiative. It is a pleasure to talk to you about what has happened in our field since the conference a year ago. So, today I wanted to give you an overview of some things that we see at the Global CO2 Initiative. And before I dive into those details, just a reminder of the perspective that the Global CO2 Initiative brings to this conversation. We focus on capturing CO2 from a variety of sources. We see that in the upper left-hand side. So we see capture from smokestack, from direct air capture, or from plant-based materials, trees or microorganisms. And then the utilization or conversion of that CO2 into products. And there are varieties shown here, of course, by tendency. These are business to business products. So on the left-hand side, we see concrete and aggregates. Building materials, of course, are a really large market, both in terms of dollars and also in terms of potential durable CO2 storage for carbon dioxide, but also those important circular carbon markets for sustainable aviation fuel, other fuels, and a whole plethora of chemicals. On the right, we also see some consumer goods, particularly these are all, many of them are all still in demonstration project, but we see some clothing there in the upper right from Adidas that they trialed last year using LanzaTech's technology that turns ethanol into polyester yarn. We also see the On shoe and soap. Air Company has made hand sanitizer, vodka, and of course, food products. And although we see an attractive image of a man drinking some protein powder, at this point in time, the reality is that food from CO2 tends to be spent fermentation material that is fed to cows and fish. So what we notice about the carbon capture and utilization industry or carbon conversion industry is that those of us in the field tend to talk about it as an industry, but it is a multitude of industries. And going forward, that is actually an adjustment we're starting to make, is to make sure that that perspective is accurately represented. So, with that as a background, what has happened since we got together a year ago? Well, first of all, Carbon X Prize concluded. Each of the finalist teams, there were 1,300 applicants initially, needed to demonstrate 1,000 tons of removal in the last year. The grand prize winner was Maddie Carbon with an accelerated weathering process. They're Indian based and they will be delivering significant benefits, not in terms of just in terms of carbon removal, but also economic benefit to smallholder farmers. And of course, CCU companies are making great progress. Oxalis Energy, they are Connecticut based. They are totally hot for cooling things down. They were announced as a top innovator by the World Economic Forum's Carbon Capture and Utilization Challenge. They have a reactor process which operates at STP, standard temperature and pressure, for converting CO2 and water into methanol across an electrolyzer membrane. They were also acknowledged by Heat Map and Forbes as a top innovator, so we're excited about that. DNV, they are an independent risk management agency and certification body headquartered in Norway. They certified Carbon 8's CCUS methodology for sequestering CO2 in minerals. Lightweight aggregates, to be specific. They have Carbonate has a containerized system, and DNV certified that it meets ISO 14064 Part 2. So that relates to, of course, quantifying, reporting, monitoring, so MRV. And that is a really significant milestone for decentralized carbon capture and utilization. Celanese announced a partnership with Baumet to make CCU binders from their Clear Lake, Texas plant for sustainable paint. So it will be an ingredient, it's a low carbon acetic acid, which is used as a raw material as a binder in paint. LanzaTech has been making ethanol for a few years now, but last December they made enough to fill a barge. That was exciting. The capture is coming from ArcelorMittal's steel and all facility in Belgium. That's one of their flagship plants, and they are converting into fuel grade ethanol. Those that product then can be used further in European markets to make a wide variety of products. So we were excited to see that they're scaling up. More success on the steel front. Carbon Free won both a Time and Statista award as top green tech companies. Carbon Free is capturing CO2, will be capturing CO2 next year in 2026 at United States Steel Gary, Indiana plant. And it is represented as a carbon neutral product. They are producing food grade calcium carbonate, which can be used in food and many other industries: paper, plastics, paint, personal care, and of course, building materials. One of the things we've been excited about with Carbon Free is that they have a profitable business model. And we want, those are exciting to see. Want to see more of those. A strong competitor against incumbent products. Overseas, Holcim um, demonstrated, they launched a project to demonstrate 700,000 tons of CO2 per year, um, which will be converted into sustainable aviation fuel using on-site green hydrogen production, all powered by renewables. What is the carbon dioxide that is not used for sustainable aviation fuel production will be deposited underground in a secure well. So, really fantastic example of circular use of carbon captured with durable storage. We'll also see progress on the capture side. Svante in Canada just launched, opened a new plant in May, just a couple weeks ago, which is capable of producing 10 500,000 ton per year capture units annually. I was very pleased to see this in person. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's ready to go. And Avnos also announced their director capture company announced a project with the US Navy to demonstrate 450 tons per year capture. They have a unique process that also captures water, and that could have applicability for things like data centers that operate in dry climates that may need that use water for cooling, and of course other applications as well. So what happened in the markets? According to CDR.FYI, the CDR market continues to grow. It grew 78% in 2024. Total purchase volume almost 8 million tons. The buyers are still pretty concentrated, but it was good to see the growth. And so there's, of course, the market grew, which means delivery of tonnage grew. Over 300,000 tons of durable CDR were delivered, which was a 120% increase in 2023. And almost $1 billion of equity capital were invested into durable CDR companies in 2024. So all exciting developments. The prices of durable CDR is still seeing tremendous fluctuation. You can see here the changes from 2023 to 2024. The state of the voluntary carbon markets still is pretty disorganized, and of course, there's a lot of really great work going on to get those where they're functioning more effectively. But so a lot of variations in prices, but still the overall trend is, despite that, an increase in purchases. The buyers are the same for the most part as the past. Repeat buyer volume grew 95% in 2024 and accounted for 91% of all the purchase volume. So we see the common, the actors we have been seeing, the Microsoft and the Google and Frontier and others. So, changing gears, one of the things that the Global CO2 Initiative is really interested in is influencing the IPCC's assessment reports. At this point in time, especially durable storage of carbon dioxide in products such as construction materials is not represented. Minerals are represented, but we're not seeing concrete, for example. And we would like to see that change. There are, also products such as long-lived plastics, carbon fiber. So, given that the IPCC really looks to the state of carbon dioxide removal report as its guide for what to include, we are working with that team to give them data that hopefully can be included going forward. So the University of Michigan is partnered up with UCLA, UPenn, and Cornell to create a review paper that will be published in a formal journal by the end of this year that will hopefully influence all of this and start to get carbon utilization, durable carbon storage, and carbon utilization products represented in this narrative. Lastly, I'd like to talk about another activity at the Global CO2 Initiative that is titled Catalyzing Carbon Innovation. We pulled together a workshop last month with about 25 people representing a wide variety of members of the CCUS ecosystem to talk about what are the barriers to scaling our industry right now. What's in the way? What do we need to do to keep moving forward? And here is a list of the organizations that were represented. And what you see here is a wide variety of both startups. So, we have Capture, for example, Avnos. There we had insurance and risk management with Aon. We had policy, we had Carbon 180, we had National Wildlife Federation. We had government represented by the state of Michigan, the Chamber of Commerce. That's a nonprofit, but some local state level thinking was represented, as well as durable carbon storage with startups such as Carbon Free. But we also had incumbent companies. We had Dow, we had Ed Levy, we had United States Steel, and others. So wide variety of voices. And we digested this. We took a day to ask ourselves, what are the barriers to scaling up? And we looked at case studies. We looked at 2 case studies for chemicals and fuels and 2 case studies for mineralization to stimulate the conversation. We emerged from that with 13 barriers and 31 actions to address those barriers. And that is too much to summarize in this short presentation this morning, but here are some of the key actions that came out of that conversation. Education continues to be very, very important, even though, like, I personally been in this field for 10 years. And, of course, the people in the room, most of them had been as well. And it's still just a real need to educate both the public and the supply chain. Entities, for example, like trade organizations who just don't understand that carbon utilization or carbon conversion is something that can be done and is worthy of including in long-term strategy and plans. But we also talked about things like adoption of CCU products with procurement incentives and purchasing criteria, the need to create 45Q policy parity for CCS and CCU. Of course, those profitable business models continue to be important. Uniform guidance to carbon tracking, and many others. So these are just a few examples, and we are now working on unpacking those. Like, for example, one barrier is lack of understanding of CCU as a term. So what are some of the things we can do? And I already highlighted a few things that like educate the public, but what would that look like? So, refining the narrative, first of all, how do we talk about this? And how can we also get examples in the public eye? So, some really fun ideas we're getting CCU products into, like music or film awards, like trophies or goodie bags, um, black black dresses on the red carpet made from CCU materials. Perhaps another industry competition, get first movers engaged in different ways. So lots of different ideas, and that's just one example. As another example, the carbon markets again are confusing, and there is a lot going on in this space. But one area that was highlighted by the voices in the room was how does ownership of the carbon dioxide molecule along with the potential tax and carbon credit revenue flow along the supply chain. That's still a really important area that needs attention. As in yet another example, creating performance-based certifications and standards. The current certifications and standards can be prescriptive, and they do not include CO2 as an ingredient. And in order for CCU products to be able to compete successfully against incumbent products, changing those certifications and standards to be based on how a material performs rather than what the material contains is needed. So, with one day, what we were able to do was to identify what are the barriers and what are, again, we emerged with 31 actions. Our next step is to prioritize those actions. What should be tackled first? Where is collaborative action needed for those barriers? And if collaborative action is needed, who should lead? Who should be involved? And then to look at working groups, both regionally and globally, to solve some of these barriers. So that's where we're going to be headed next. I look forward to telling you next year when we get together what happened. And if you are interested in participating in this, please reach out. We would welcome your involvement. So, with that, I will conclude my remarks and thank you for your attention this morning.